Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. President Donald Trump speaks remotely to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland about tariffs and trade, the war in Ukraine, and U.S. China relations. The U.S. Senate confirms John Ratcliffe to be CIA director in a bipartisan vote, and narrowly votes to advance the nomination of Pete Hegseth to be defense secretary. Senate Agriculture Committee holds a hearing for Brooke Rollins, nominated for Agriculture Secretary. She talks about the department's two big spending categories, supporting farmers and food and nutrition programs. And a federal judge puts a temporary hold on President Trump's executive order to restrict birthright citizenship, which is U.S. citizenship for anyone born on American soil, saying it violates the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. We'll talk about the ruling with The Hill's court's reporter, Zach Schonfeld. Associated Press writes that President Donald Trump used an address Thursday to the World Economic Forum to promise global elites lower taxes if they bring manufacturing to the U.S. and threaten to impose tariffs if they don't. Speaking by video from the White House to the annual summit in Davos, Switzerland, on his third full day in office, Trump ran through his flurry of executive action since his swearing in and claimed that he had a massive mandate from the American people to bring change. He laid out a carrot-and-stick approach for private investment in the U.S. AP article continues that Trump, who spoke Wednesday to Saudi Arabia's crown prince, also said Thursday that the kingdom wants to invest $600 billion in the U.S., but that he would ask the crown prince Mohammed bin Salman to increase it to $1 trillion. The remark drew some laughter from the crowd in the hall in Davos. Trump, who promised to end the Russia-Ukraine war before taking office, said it remained a top priority, but he offered few clues on how he would do so. Some of the reporting from Associated Press. Here's President Trump on tariffs.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
And President Trump about Saudi Arabia and the war in Ukraine, he tied the two together through the price of oil.
And it's also reported today in the papers that Saudi Arabia will be investing at least $600 billion in America, but I'll be asking the Crown Prince, who's a fantastic guy, to round it out to around $1 trillion. I think they'll do that because we've been very good to them. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which, frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war. They should have done it long ago. They're very responsible, actually, to a certain extent, for what's taking place. Millions of lives are being lost. With oil prices going down, I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world. Interest rates should follow us.
President Donald Trump speaking virtually from the White House to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He also called for NATO members to spend at least 5% of gross domestic product on defense. The current target is 2%. Again, from the Associated Press article, in the largest hall in the Davos Congress Center, seating capacity 850, Trump's appearance drew nearly standing room-only turnout. The crowd included diplomats, human rights advocates, academics, and business leaders. His return to the White House and his barrage of executive orders have been the talk of the town this week in the snowbound Swiss town. At times, Trump drew a few groans, like when he derided inept members of the outgoing Biden administration. The loudest laughter came when WEF President Borge Brenda said Trump had called Chinese President Xi Jinping over the weekend, and the U.S. leader quickly corrected him. He called me. Reporting from Associated Press, here is that exchange with the presidents.
We know that the most consequential relationship in the world is between the U.S. and China. U.S. 28% of the global economy, China close to 20%. That's almost half of the global GDP. And we know that you called President Xi Jinping last Friday. We heard that you had a good discussion. How do you see the relationship between the U.S. and China in the next 4 years under your leadership?
He called me, but I see it very good. I think that we're going to have a very good relationship. All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China. Biden allowed it to get out of hand. He's $1.1 trillion deficit. It's ridiculous. And it's just an unfair relationship. And we have to make it just fair. We don't have to make it phenomenal. We have to make it a fair relationship. Right now, it's not a fair relationship. The deficit is massive, as it is with other countries, a lot of Asian countries, actually. But we have deficits that are very big, and we can't keep doing that. So we're not going to keep doing that. But I like President Xi very much. I've always liked him. We always had a very good relationship. It was very strained with COVID coming out of Wuhan. Obviously, that strained it. I'm sure it strained it with a lot of people, but that strained our relationship. But we always had a great relationship, I would say, and we look forward to doing very well with China and getting along with China. Hopefully, China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia, Ukraine. They have a great deal of power over that situation. And we'll work with them. And I mentioned that during our phone conversation with President Xi. And hopefully we could work together and get that stopped. We'd like to see denuclearization. In fact, with President Putin prior to an election result, which was frankly ridiculous, we were talking about denuclearization of our two countries, and China would have come along. China has a much smaller right now nuclear armament than us, or field than us, but they're going to be catching it at some point over the next 4 or 5 years. And I will tell you that President Putin really liked the idea of cutting way back on nuclear. And I think the rest of the world, we would have gotten them to follow. And China would have come along, too. China also liked it. Tremendous amounts of money are being spent on nuclear. And the destructive capability is something that we don't even want to talk about today because you don't want to hear it. It's too depressing. So we want to see if we can denuclearize, and I think that's very possible. And I can tell you that President Putin wanted to do it. He and I wanted to do it. We had a good conversation with China. They would have been involved, and that would have been an unbelievable thing for the planet.
President Donald Trump speaking to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, virtually from Washington, D.C. Inc. magazine has an article that more than half the American businesses in China, the most in 5 years, say they are concerned about a further deterioration in the bilateral relationship between the world's two largest economies. A survey published on Thursday showed the survey from the American Chamber of Commerce in China. This is Washington Today. Story from AP, the Senate on Thursday confirmed John Ratcliffe as CIA director, giving President Donald Trump the second member of his new cabinet. Ratcliffe was director of national intelligence during Trump's first term and is the first person to have held that position and the top post at the CIA, the nation's premier spy agency. The Texas Republican is a former federal prosecutor who emerged as a fierce Trump defender while serving as a congressman during Trump's first impeachment. The vote was 74-25. That was from Associated Press. Senator John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, supported the nomination and also said on the Senate floor the Senate should have voted earlier in the week.
Today, this Senate will confirm John Ratcliffe to be the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. This is a win for our national security. Frankly, this should have been done 2 days ago, but Democrats unnecessarily delayed this important vote. John Ratcliffe is undeniably qualified for the job. He's going to lead the CIA without bias and with the safety of the American people being his top priority.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, voted against the John Ratcliffe nomination.
I will respectfully vote no, not because of our political difference, which of course exists, but because I'm deeply worried that Mr. Ratcliffe will be unable to stand up to people like Donald Trump and Tulsi Gabbard, who are known to falsify intelligence. As CIA director, Mr. Ratcliffe will have to make decisions based on intelligence and fact. There may be no agency more important than the CIA that has to be fact-based. Sometimes these facts will lead to inconvenient conclusions for his superiors and the president. It's in those cases where truth, not fiction, not ideology, must prevail. And I have my doubts that Mr. Ratcliffe will be able to hold firm. Most troubling about Mr. Ratcliffe were the answers I got from him about Tulsi Gabbard, President Trump's nominee to serve as Director of National Intelligence. If confirmed, Ms. Gabbard would oversee the CIA and our entire intelligence community. And I think she'd be colossally disruptive for American security. If there's anyone who hasn't been fact-based, as you've listened to her statements over the years, it's Tulsi Gabbard. She seems to make things up out of thin air. No one could be worse in a position of D&I than someone who doesn't believe in facts. So I told Mr. Ratcliffe he should urge President Trump to drop her nomination. If he really cares about the CIA and its integrity, he couldn't report to somebody like Tulsi Gabbard in good conscience. She's simply too risky.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, the minority leader on the Senate floor, before the Senate voted to confirm John Ratcliffe as CIA director. Vote was 74 to 25, 21 members of the Democratic caucus joining Republicans in voting yes. From Fox News, Pete Hegseth cleared a procedural hurdle Thursday to advance his confirmation to lead the Defense Department for a final Senate vote, setting up a high-stakes showdown. A motion to invoke cloture or begin up to 30 hours of debate passed 51 to 49. Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska voted no on advancing Hegseth's confirmation. Article notes that Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, voted yes. Hegseth's nomination was dealt another hurdle this week when reports emerged that his ex-sister-in-law alleged Hegseth abused his second wife. That was from the Fox News article. Before the procedural vote, the leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee spoke on the Senate floor about the nomination. Here's Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, the committee chair.
In testimony lasting nearly 4 hours, he addressed three key audiences: our committee, the United States Senate as a whole, and the American people. I think the American people liked what they saw. I know I did. He showed each of us why President Trump chose him to be the next Secretary of Defense. First of all, he articulated a clear vision of the Pentagon. I think it's clear to anyone who listened that he's going to bring energy and fresh ideas to shake up the department's stagnant bureaucracy. He will restore a warfighting ethos and relentlessly focus on the military's core mission to deter conflict and, if necessary, to win a war. Mr. Hegseth committed to bringing a swift end to the corrosive social policies that serve to divide our service members rather than unite them. And as I pointed out earlier, the American people are behind him in this regard overwhelmingly. He correctly stated that we need to change the way the Pentagon does business. He will restore a culture of accountability by cutting red tape, incentivizing innovation, and rebuilding the defense industrial base. He affirmed his intent to tackle the hardest systemic problems that plague the Pentagon, challenges that previous secretaries have proven unable to fix. And I mentioned that audit. I sincerely believe we'll get an audit done under his oversight. And importantly, he agreed that maintaining the inadequate Biden-era defense budget levels would be dangerous to our national security.
Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, chair of the Armed Services Committee on the Senate floor. Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, is the committee's ranking member. He said Pete Hegseth is unqualified to lead the Defense Department, not only because of his policy positions, but because of his character. Senator Reed spoke about a sworn statement from Pete Hegseth's ex-sister-in-law saying he was abusive to his second wife.
Once, while drunk in uniform, which is a violation of military law, Mr. Hegseth was so inebriated that his brother had to carry him out of a Minneapolis strip club. This occurred during a drill weekend with the Minnesota National Guard. The FBI was also told that Mr. Hegseth's second wife had an escape plan that involved texting a safe word to her friends and family to urgently request help without putting herself in more danger. This escape plan was executed on at least one occasion. On at least one occasion, his second wife hid in her closet out of fear. And in many detailed examples, the FBI was told that Mr. Hegseth regularly became so drunk that he passed out, vomited, and had to be carried out of family events and public settings, sometimes shouting sexually and racist offensive comments. My point is this. We know that Pete Hegseth, former sister-in-law, testified to the FBI about his history of abuse, alcoholism, and disgraceful public behavior. However, we know now that her testimony was not adequately included in the Trump transitions team background briefing to the Senate. This begs the question, what else is missing from the FBI report? The Senate is not considering a low-level appointee right now. We are advising and consenting on the nominee for Secretary of Defense, and we cannot risk installing a leader who may have a history that is exploitable by our adversaries. Nor can we risk confirming a Secretary of Defense who has shown that he is incapable of being responsible, accountable, and law-abiding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as that job requires.
Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, Armed Services Committee ranking member on the Senate floor. Before the Senate voted to advance the Pete Hegseth nomination, the vote was 51-49. There were 2 no votes from Republicans, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. Senator Murkowski put out a statement saying that Pete Hegseth does not have the experience to lead the Pentagon and that his statements about women in combat concern her. And the statement from Senator Murkowski ends with this: above all, I believe that character is the defining trait required of the Secretary of Defense and must be prioritized without compromise. The leader of the Department of Defense must demonstrate and model the standards of behavior and character we expect of all service members, and Mr. Hegseth's nomination to the role poses significant concerns that I cannot overlook. Given the global security environment we're operating in, it is critical that we confirm a Secretary of Defense. However, I regret that I am unable to support Mr. Hegseth. That was from Senator Murkowski. Senator Collins also putting out a statement that cites lack of management experience with the nominee and his positions on women in combat, and includes this: Mr. Hegseth also appears to lack a sufficient appreciation for some of the policies that the military is required to follow because they are codified in the laws of the United States of America. While I understand his points on the importance of up-to-date and workable rules on engagement, our prohibitions against torture come from American laws and treaties ratified by the United States, including the Geneva Conventions. That was from Senator Susan Collins. Again, a final vote on the Hegseth nomination for Defense Secretary could come Saturday night. Several more of President Trump's cabinet nominees were approved by Senate committees today. In the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, Scott Turner for HUD Secretary came out from a 13-11 vote. Energy and Natural Resources Committee approved Doug Burgum for Interior Secretary, 18-2. And then Chris Wright for Energy Secretary, 15-5. Veterans Affairs Committee reported Doug Collins for VA Secretary, 18-1. The committee leaders made statements before that vote. Here's ranking Democrat Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He said he's voting yes, but he has some concerns.
If he's confirmed, as I expect he will be, I welcome the opportunity to work and advocate with him in the administration and improve services for veterans in Connecticut and across the country, and especially, as I know every member of this committee is interested in doing, building and rebuilding and renovating the infrastructure and facilities that are so important. I continue to have serious, really intense concerns about the hiring freeze that has been apparently implemented in the Trump administration. Whatever the effects on other departments or agencies, all of you know how dire the need is for the doctors, the nurses, the attendants, everybody involved in the VA healthcare system. There are openings now. They need to be filled, particularly for mental health care. Delaying these medical appointments and benefits is, in some cases, denial of those benefits because health is such an urgent need for many of our veterans, particularly our older veterans. Despite the assurances that VA benefits would be exempt, we're now hearing that there is a hiring freeze at the VBA, making it more difficult for veterans to access their earned benefits, including the benefits promised by the PAC Act. And I will address this issue on a continuing basis with the nominee.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. The committee chair, Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, answered the concerns about staffing needs.
We have asked the transition team and now the administration to further define and provide us with information about what the consequences or what the intention or what the specifics are of this hiring freeze. The words say that nothing will prohibit veterans from receiving veterans benefits. We'll find out what that exactly means. But I'd also say that it would be useful to have Secretary Collins confirmed in a position to advocate for his department and for the veterans that that department serves. And he indicated a willingness to do so. He testified that no one on the veteran side is going to miss their health care provider because of any new hiring freeze. I'd also indicate that the Biden administration, after record hiring in 2023, the Biden administration implemented a net zero growth strategy in 2024 and had the goal of reducing the VA workforce by 10,000 employees. This was due to both budgetary concerns and the VA's leadership that the VA had necessary workforce to fulfill its mission. It will be our job to make sure that we know what the facts are and whether there's sufficient staffing to make sure that veterans receive the care and benefits that they deserve, and this committee needs to do its work. But the bottom line is, I think that having the Secretary confirmed by this committee and then by the Senate puts us in a better position to make sure that those positions are known by us and that when necessary, we're capable of advocating for any of our concerns.
Senator Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, before the committee voted today to approve former Republican Congressman of Georgia, Doug Collins, for VA Secretary. The Hill writing about it, the panel voted 18-1, with the lone no vote coming from Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii, who said Collins' plans for the VA were not in line with what she believed was right for veterans across the country. Article goes on, among her concerns was the potential for Collins to overturn a Biden administration rule that allows the VA to provide abortions to veterans for a pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or when the life of a pregnant woman is at risk, even in states where it has been largely outlawed. That was from The Hill. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee today advanced the nominee for EPA Administrator, Environmental Protection Agency, Lee Zeldin, in an 11-8 vote. Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat of Arizona, the only Democrat voting in favor. The leaders of that committee also making statements before the vote. Here is Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican of West Virginia.
I believe he is well qualified for the position of administrator and will be an excellent addition to the president's cabinet. His past experience as the congressman representing New York's 1st congressional district gives him a unique understanding of how Congress makes laws, oversees the executive branch, and what is expected when it gives a mandate to federal agencies. As a representative from a northeastern state and a district with a diverse set of political views, he understands what it means to build consensus to achieve durable results. He also has necessary experience and integrity as a veteran of the war on terrorism, a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, an attorney and a former congressman, to implement the president's agenda at the agency pursuant to congressionally provided authority. Finally, I was very pleased during his testimony to see how he intends to run the agency in line with the laws that the Congress has passed, with the goal of prioritizing EPA's actions on the core responsibilities of the agency that are essential to protecting health and our land, air, and water. As we have seen over the past 25 years, the policy of the EPA can have a significant impact on not just the environment, but our economy. The EPA should support policies and set rules that improve the environment while allowing innovators to grow the economy and protecting the pocketbook of American families. I believe that's a win-win. Unfortunately, too often the EPA has strayed from its mission, instead smothered small businesses and communities. I can speak from experience, my state of West Virginia, with red tape and forced higher costs on our constituents, a lose-lose. My home state of West Virginia, as I stated, has felt the negative impacts of EPA's regulatory overreach in years, devastating portions of our state's economy and putting my constituents out of work. Congressman Zeldin has shown that he understands the importance of striking the right balance to improve the lives of Americans across the country and to protect the environment while also uplifting communities and cities across the nation.
Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican from West Virginia, the committee chair on the nomination. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, is the committee's ranking member. He voted no.
The Trump agenda, after receiving immense funding from fossil fuel, is to break down climate change protections so that his big oil donors can sell more oil and gas and pollute for free. Which brings us to Lee Zeldin. The question becomes, is this gentleman capable of standing against that big oil political juggernaut? Sadly, all signs point to no. His consulting for Trump-affiliated organizations and his op-ed spouting big oil-approved talking points do not inspire confidence. He sits on the board of a Trump-affiliated dark money operation and won't disclose its donors even to the ethics officials looking for conflicts of interest at EPA. I think the American people deserve to know who the donors are, and of course so does EPA's ethics teams, so they can know whether decisions he makes at EPA are driven by those donor interests or by the public interests. He did not disavow moving EPA's headquarters, saying only that he hasn't been told of any plans. When asked if he supported traumatizing or firing most of EPA's staff, he equivocated, "I look forward to working with the talented career staff at EPA, and I look forward to working with the very talented career staff at EPA," is how he non-answered. He refused to acknowledge that the price of oil is set by a cartel and driven by geopolitical events over which we have no control. And when asked about wind power, he spouted fossil fuel-funded talking points about harms to marine life that are offensive to anyone who knows anything about oceans and marine life.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, ranking member on the Environment and Public Works Committee at today's meeting before the vote to send the nomination of Lee Zeldin, former Congressman of New York, to be EPA Administrator to the full Senate. The vote was 11-8. Wall Street today, the Dow up 408, NASDAQ up 44, S&P up 32. Washington today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Agriculture Secretary nominee Brooke Rollins testified today before the Senate Agriculture Committee. New York Times article on the hearing reads, Ms. Rollins, a former White House official during Mr. Trump's first term, does not have the traditional resume of an agriculture secretary, though her past suggests she has an interest in the sector. She participated in youth agricultural programs, has a degree in agricultural development, and according to her public financial disclosure, owns show cattle. She also led two prominent conservative think tanks and served as deputy general counsel to the governor of Texas, where she is from. If confirmed, Ms. Rollins would oversee an agency with an annual budget of more than $200 billion and nearly 100,000 employees, part of the New York Times article. Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, asked Brooke Rollins about farm programs.
In agriculture, as you know, we have a system of family-based farmers and ranchers across this country, 16 million people involved in agriculture in some way, shape, or form, versus look at all these other industries that are concentrated. But we have this system of family-based farmers and ranchers, businesses, small businesses. And what they produce for every single American every single day is the highest quality, lowest cost food supply in the world. Americans have better choice, better quality, and spend less of their budget on food than almost any other developed country. That's what we have because we have good farm policy. And that means affordable crop insurance, and that means a counter-cyclical safety net that works, keeping the farm in the Farm Bill. Will you commit to help us get that? We're past due. We need to get it done. Will you commit to help us get it done and get it done in the way I described?
Yes, sir. And again, maybe the pathological optimist in me, but I've talked to from both sides of the aisle, the complexity, the challenges in the last year or so of reauthorizing it. And I hope that I can be a force multiplier. And I hope what I bring to the table is the opportunity to work alongside both sides to get us where we need to be for our farmers and ranchers, and some security, some understanding that the net is there, and that the loans are there, and that the insurance is there, and that they can continue to be the best producers in the world for the world food supply. So I really look forward to that, obviously providing you the technical assistance that you need to be able to do your job, but also, if asked or if called, to help in any other way I can to get this done.
Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, questioning Agriculture Secretary nominee Brooke Rollins at today's confirmation hearing. Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat from Georgia, asked the nominee about the other major programs overseen by the Agriculture Department, nutrition and food aid.
Fighting hunger has long been a part of my life's work, long before I was elected to the Senate. As you know, I'm a pastor, and the one miracle story that's in all the Gospels, all four, is the feeding of the 5,000.
That's right.
And so I constantly hear from Georgia farmers, Georgia families, about how their dollar just doesn't go as far at the grocery store as it used to. The average Georgian participating in SNAP, a food assistance program that provides critical nutrition aid to our most vulnerable families, has about $6.15 a day to spend on food. In your view, is $6.15 a day adequate to avoid hunger for Georgia families?
Sir, this is a supplemental program. I am just getting my arms around it. There is few that will be in my role, if confirmed, that have a passion for this more than I do. Serving those who are most in need, as you and I discussed in your office, is a driving force of my entire life. It almost sent me to seminary, but I ended up in public policy instead. So you have my wholehearted commitment to look and ensure that the people who need this the most are receiving it in the best way possible, but at the same time ensuring that all of the tax dollars that are spent on it are also spent in the best way possible.
One of the things, as these families struggle, one of the things that I'm concerned about are proposals to slash this critical assistance and create additional work verification red tape for families participating in these programs. Do you think creating more bureaucratic red tape for families will help them purchase nutritious food?
I think it's extremely important that we take a wholesale look at every one of these programs and ensure that they are serving the people that are needing the programs, and that they are the safety net they're truly set out to be. Obviously, I do not like the words bureaucracy or red tape, but ensuring that we have set up the appropriate lifelines and the appropriate structure so that we can get these resources to the families that need them the most.
Senator Raphael Warnock, Democrat of Georgia, questioning Agriculture Secretary nominee Brooke Rollins at today's Agriculture Committee confirmation hearing. Other topics covered: tariffs on agricultural commodities, immigration and seasonal farm workers, and promoting healthy foods. You can find the full video of the hearing and all the confirmation hearings covered by C-SPAN at our website, cspan.org. Politico's E&E News has this headline: Southern California blazes spur wildfire action in Congress. Article reads that management of the nation's forests will return to the congressional agenda this week as the House again takes up legislation to fight wildfire with forest thinning. A bill from the House Natural Resources Committee Chair Bruce Westerman, Republican of Arkansas, the Fix Our Forests Act, is set to advance to the House floor. It proposes fire sheds in national forests that could be thinned with fewer environmental restrictions. And in the Senate, Republican John Barrasso of Wyoming, the majority whip, proposed legislation to expand the clearing of trees near electrical power lines, among other measures. That was from E&E News. The House bill was debated and voted on today. It had bipartisan support. One of the Democrats voting yes was Jimmy Panetta of California.
In the past few years, communities all across America have witnessed devastation, destruction, and death from wildfires. Much of this calamity and crisis is due to the many communities being in high-risk areas known as the wildland-urban interface. Not just in Los Angeles or California, but throughout the entire United States, over 99 million people live in these danger zones. In my Central California district, numerous towns are located right next to national forests. Now, don't get me wrong, it's nice to have national forests as your backyard, but national forests have been neglected and mismanaged, and the risk of wildfires is much worse due to extreme weather and climate change. Some say that we shouldn't do anything and just let forests manage themselves. Unfortunately, we all bear witness to what can happen when we do nothing. Fortunately, the Fix Our Forests Act would do something by restoring the health to forests, bolstering the resiliency, and yes, reducing the threat of wildfires. As wildfire seasons have turned to wildfire years, we must be proactive when it comes to our forests. That's why, rather than just suppress fires, the Fix Our Forests Act would prevent fires, and that's how we protect our communities.
Congressman Jimmy Panetta, Democrat of California, on the House floor. Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, Democrat of New Mexico, opposed the bill.
2024 was the hottest year in human history. The wildfires in California and New Mexico were not started by bureaucracy. They were the result of the climate crisis. We must be clear that if we are going to address the catastrophic and increasing wildfires that are happening across the West, we have to stay the course in our commitment to addressing the climate crisis. We can't stand here and pretend that this bill is actually the result of the deadly wildfires in California. In fact, it's a bill that's been presented several Congresses, and many of the provisions in it have nothing to do with these wildfires whatsoever. So I say to my friends across the aisle, please join us in actually putting forward comprehensive solutions that will address the climate crisis, that will increase pay for firefighters and their benefits, that will address the resilience needs of our communities and help them rebuild.
Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, Democrat from New Mexico, on the House floor. House passed this bill by a vote of 279 to 141. With 64 Democrats joining all Republicans in voting yes. The bill now heads to the Senate. The House passed this bill last year. It was never considered by the Senate in the previous Congress. House today also passed a bill requiring health care practitioners to provide medical care to an infant after a failed abortion. The vote on that bill was 217 to 204, with one voting present. It was almost entirely party line. One Democrat voted yes, Henry Cuellar of Texas. And the one member voting present was Vicente Gonzalez, Democrat of Texas. Bill now heads to the Senate, but the Senate yesterday blocked its version of this bill from advancing, short of the 60 votes needed with a vote of 52 to 47. The votes were taken in the House and Senate this week because the annual March for Life rally is happening in Washington, D.C. on Friday. A federal judge in Seattle has put in place a temporary restraining order blocking President Donald Trump's executive order to limit birthright citizenship to people who have at least one parent who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. The judge says the order violates the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. A Justice Department attorney at the hearing argued that it did not. These differing legal opinions came up at news conferences on Capitol Hill today. Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, was with other House Republicans to introduce a bill to make President Trump's executive order the law.
Founders did not have a notion to think that this would be an issue at any time, nor did they have a notion that they would have a president who would let anybody and everybody from over 175 countries in this country illegally to cross the border. We're a nation of laws. We're a sovereign nation. But you have to have sovereign borders, and who would have thought that would have been violated? The citizenship clause was never intended to guarantee citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants.
And let me give you some statistics. The CIS, the Center for Immigration Studies, estimate that 1 out of 10 births in the United States are to an illegal mother. CIS also estimates that nearly 400,000 expectant mothers cross the border illegally in hopes of giving birth in the United States. After being granted automatic citizenship, these children can initiate chain migration with their family members. This is an exploitation of the 14th Amendment, never intended by the founders.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, Democrat from Texas, at a separate news conference with members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, disagreed.
And I wanted to just say something about birthright citizenship. I guess it's the old judge in me. You know, I think some people need to just sit down and read the damn Constitution. Because frankly, if you read it, there is just no question. The founders were crystal clear after debates about who can vote and who can be a citizen, who can actually, you know, it's this whole, I want to decide whether or not you're an American and whether or not you can vote and what, you know, they wanted to get rid of all that. And they simply said, all persons, didn't even use a gender, born, that means you were born in the United States or naturalized in the United States, are citizens of the United States. Any one of you have a question about that? It's pretty simple, right? It's easier than any civics exam or government exam, or hell, it's probably easier than the citizenship exam that is administered to thousands of immigrants. So I don't know how this is even being questioned.
Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, Democrat from Texas, the whip of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, at a caucus news conference on Capitol Hill. Zach Schonfeld, the Hill's courts and legal reporter, has been following the lawsuits over President Donald Trump's efforts to repeal birthright citizenship and joins us now. Thanks again for being with us. So what's happened so far in the courthouses across the country?
Yeah, we are now up to 6 lawsuits that have been filed against the new Trump administration and this executive order that would restrict birthright citizenship. And these lawsuits are moving pretty quickly. We've already had hearings now in 2 of the 6 cases, and we even now have a ruling in one of the cases. Earlier today, a federal judge in Seattle has blocked Trump's executive order, saying it cannot go into effect and that the challengers in that lawsuit are likely to succeed on their claims that this executive order violates the 14th Amendment's citizenship protections. Now, this order is only temporary. The proceedings in this case and the 5 other lawsuits are going to continue, but already a major setback for this new Trump Justice Department.
Have we heard about the arguments from President Trump and Republicans in Congress and the Justice Department about their interpretation of the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, the Justice Department in this new Trump administration only just getting set up, but already we are off to the races. There was an in-person hearing in Seattle on Thursday in which Justice Department prosecutors were at making arguments. We've also seen them really start to make these arguments out in writing, opposing these efforts that have been filed by various civil rights groups, immigrants' rights groups. There's also a number of pregnant women who are not here legally who say they would be affected by Trump's new restrictions. The Justice Department has been pushing back on that and insisting that this is compliant with the 14th Amendment and federal citizenship laws. Obviously, we've now seen one judge disagree with that. We're going to have several other judges who are going to opine on this in the coming days. But this is a matter that the Trump Justice Department could attempt to try to bring all the way up to the Supreme Court.
How have courts dealt with the birthright citizenship issue in the past?
Yeah, well, this birthright citizenship has been on the books since the 14th Amendment was enacted during the Reconstruction era following the Civil War. And it has long been interpreted by the Supreme Court to extend to just about almost anyone that is born on U.S. soil, regardless of the legal status of their parents. There have really only been some narrow exceptions, particularly, for example, the children of diplomats don't automatically get U.S. citizenship when they're born on U.S. soil. The other exception in the 14th Amendment that's been recognized has been for Native Americans who do have a pathway to citizenship now through federal law. But it has never been interpreted by the Supreme Court to be restricted in the way that Trump's new executive order does. So for Trump to really succeed in this legal effort, his Justice Department is really going to have to take this to the Supreme Court and try to convince at least 5 justices to overturn what had been this long understanding of how to interpret the 14th Amendment.
We're talking with Zach Schonfeld from The Hill. Maybe this is getting a little bit ahead, but how would the modern Supreme Court deal with this? What do you think the justice would do?
You know, this is certainly a very bold argument coming from the Trump administration, in saying that the 14th Amendment needs to be read in this way. And if the Supreme Court was going to agree, it would be a pretty dramatic departure from what the Supreme Court has said in the past. But I think what we're seeing from this Trump administration is that they're willing, to try these things out in court, even if they lose. And I think that's an issue and a trend that we see not only here on the birthright citizenship issue, but you see on a whole lot of other issues as well. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of litigation against various Trump executive actions that he enacts in the coming months. So certainly the Trump administration can try, and they can try to convince some justices to overturn what has been some of the court's precedents in the past. And, we've seen on other issues that sometimes that can be successful. Look to just a few years ago when the Supreme Court's conservative majority overturned precedents regarding abortion access. So, I think the Trump administration will say never, but they certainly have an uphill battle ahead of them.
And finally, we've been talking about the legal aspects, but from a policy point of view, how does repealing birthright citizenship fit into President Trump's agenda?
Yeah, this is one of a number of executive actions that President Trump signed in the Oval Office on his first day back in the White House on immigration. Of course, immigration in the southern border was such a major focus of this campaign. And now Trump's team has been saying that they believe they effectively have a mandate to take some of these actions, whether it be here restricting birthright citizenship. They've already made changes to the ability for federal authorities to carry out expedited deportations. And now, there's talk about reinstituting workplace raids. So I think this is now very quickly becoming a very aggressive posture by the Trump administration on the border, but it's one that they believe that they effectively have a political mandate for.
Zach Schonfeld, The Hill's courts and legal reporter. Find his articles at thehill.com and on X at Zach A. Schonfeld. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you.
And President Donald Trump was asked today about the federal court action on his executive order.
Mr. President, a U.S. judge temporarily blocked the birthright citizenship order. Do you have any reaction?
No, obviously we'll appeal it. They put it before a certain judge in Seattle, I guess, right? And there's no surprises with that judge.
President Donald Trump taking questions in the White House Oval Office. He did so after signing more executive orders, one on artificial intelligence, another on cryptocurrency, a third on a Science and Technology Advisory Commission, another one recognizing an Indian tribe in North Carolina, issuing pardons for about 24 anti-abortion protesters who were prosecuted under the FACE Act, that's Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, and an order declassifying files on the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, and civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.